Welcome to episode 29 of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. On tonight's show, I'm going to be talking about Kasama, photo shoot I did with them. Let me just minimize that and flip this over. So I did a particular band shoot for a promotional shoot for local band. So I'm going to be talking about that. Also coming up tonight on the critique section, I've had a few people send in their images. Becca is wanting to know about the difference between, well, what happens when you turn things to black and white and how that can affect texture and what have you. Then we also have Maya created a photo which she was quite pleased with, but just never really got the response that she wanted it from. So we'll do a little bit of looking back at that. Mandy found this beautiful spot in the Lake District, took this brilliant photo. But what we're going to talk about is a couple of extra other ways that it might have been edited that perhaps changed the mood and feel of it a little bit. Then Stacey was playing around with the idea of doing a selfie. Didn't feel she quite got the light right, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then finally, we've also got VG was taking a picture of a flower and wanted to know a little bit more about how she might have done it differently or done some editing with it. So that's all that's coming up this evening. We're here live on Facebook, so by all means, please. So I'll just close all these little windows here. Leave comments. If you're sitting watching this live, let me know you're here. I see a couple of people have said, "Oh, Stacey's coming. Good afternoon, Kim and Maggie, coming live from Hatboro, that's Pennsylvania." Now Thean has joined. Good evening, and Becca has joined us as well. Well, hi Becca, and hi Thean, and hi Stacey, and hi Maggie, my wife, who's also commented and is in the kitchen next door. So, if you're watching, and a hello from VG2. So yeah, let me know you're here. If you're first time here, let me know where you're from as well. It's always nice. At the moment, we've got everything from America to India, which is always a good start. And if you're watching these get recorded, so they'll be going out on YouTube tomorrow on the Wednesday. Leave a comment for me there as well. You can always leave. I think YouTube lets me know there's been comments, and we can always, if you see anything this evening you want to comment on, leave a comment there. Yeah, I don't think I use enough of YouTube, so yeah, make the most of that one. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe as well. If you find this evening interesting, then do consider contributing towards it via buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Contributions to the podcast are not absolutely not compulsory, but they are always appreciated. Right, okay, that's the kind of beginning bit out of the way. So what I want to start talking about this evening is the band Kasama. And okay, I closed all the windows, so let me flip back over here, and I will flip over here for the moment and talk a little bit about. So Kasama are a local band, indie music, strong, powerful. I really like their music, a lot of fun. The reason I ended up sort of doing a photo shoot for them, though, was because they had that EP coming out, Noisy Neighbours. And really, part of their idea for a photo shoot was they wanted to get the radio masts up at Skyburn into the background. And you can see it in the background of this photo. However, they'd already done a photo shoot with a friend of theirs, and it hadn't quite worked out. And what had happened was they'd gone right up to the mast. And, of course, it's massive, you're standing. So the person taking the photo was pretty much lying on the floor, looking up, trying to fit them and the radio mast in. Because if you just had them standing next to the radio mast, you couldn't tell it was a radio mast. And then if you stood so far back, then, well, you can see if you got the whole radio mast in and they were standing under it, you wouldn't even be able to make them out. So they tried that. It hadn't really worked particularly well. There was also a sort of sense of them sort of peering over, looking at the photographer lying down on the ground and feeling like they were sort of looking up the nose as such. And all in all, it would have been a little bit awkward because the photo shoot had been done as a favour. Hadn't really worked the way they wanted it. So they came to me to have a chat. And I knew, of course, immediately the first problem was there was this sort of trying to fit everything in, trying to fit the mast in while you were trying to fit the people in. So the simple solution was to do the setup away from the mast, have the mast actually in the background a few hundred metres back. So with that idea, there was then the case of, well, okay, what are we going to do? What kind of setup are we going to create? And so we bounced some ideas backwards and forwards, and they quite like the idea of having this sort of domestic setting out on top of the hill. And I'll just show you that this is a thumbnail sketch. Thumbnail sketches are wonderful things. And what we've got here, now the original idea was that there was going to be a TV sitting on a desk or a table. In the end, the TV proved to be completely impractical. Sofa, somebody eating chips, a guy in the middle, somebody playing guitar, somebody playing football, question mark, perhaps a flower pot with a plant in it, and then the radio mast in the background. So although obviously, this doesn't look completely like that, it's a guide, it's enough. There are some photographers who have a really, really clear, strong vision of exactly what they want, and their sketches are almost photorealism, and then essentially the photography is trying to recapture every single exact bit. I don't tend to work like that. What I tend to do is I quite like the thumbnail sketch idea, where you've got a rough idea, a reasonable idea of what you're trying to do, but then when you're out on location, because there are so many different ways things can go, so many possibilities, so many unknowns, so many things that can trip you up, that you have to be kind of flexible with what you do. So actually, I think what I will do here is I'll show you a behind the scenes video that we created for it. I knew that if I was going to be doing this shoot, it would be quite fun to get it videoed. So I put out word just saying, because I keep getting people saying, look, next time you're doing a photo shoot, Kim, invite me along. I'll do anything. I'll hold a stand. I'll video things for you, whatever you want. And then I can never remember who said. So I stuck a thing on Facebook, got a few responses, and one in particular I got from Brody. And Brody I'd done photography with before, and so she's she's studied film and media, and she does her own wee photography business too. So Brody came along, and she essentially did the pile of video clips for me, which I then put together to a soundtrack from Kasama. So no, not that one, and I'll just play this. I'll just turn that down a bit. That, I think you can probably hear the music in the background. If you can, that is Kasama's. So you can see we went up, set up all the furniture. You can see the mast in the background. You can also see that I'm well wrapped up. And you can look at the wind. It was Baltic, as they say around here. It was a cold wind. You can see him blowing his hands there. We're on top of a hill, and there's nothing between us and to stop the wind blowing straight at us. I think it was in an April. Yeah, pretty certain it was April when we did this shoot. Got frozen chips there because he wanted to look like he was eating chips. Splurted ketchup on the top. There's me arranging. We wanted to have bottles. We can see the TV was swapped for a radio, and then there's the shot. So I'm sort of showing them the roughs in the back of the camera to make sure that everybody's on board and we can see what's going on. And then we did a second shot, which we wanted to have much more of a kind of landscape thing where we had everybody leaning into the camera. And I'll talk more about that one in a moment. And that's how this photo turned out. So back to this one then. And well, I'll show you a couple of little essentially part of the thing was as you sort of saw from the video, it was a very dull, overcast day, very windy, but the light was incredibly dull, and I wanted to create some shadows, and you can see here that it does look like they are lit. I mean, you can see like the shadow play over here, and it gives more depth than if I'd just taken the ambient light. So to just show you here, here's the setup. You can see I've got two off-camera flashes over on the left here to create a light coming forward. And what I've done for those who are interested in how you do, essentially I've underexposed with the camera so that it appears darker than it actually is, and then that way anything that's lit by the flashes gets lit up a little bit more. Here you can see Brody on the right here, sort of doing little bits of filming of the table and what have you, getting footage for the video. And then what we've also got here, and then this here is the excuse me, this is the photo from which I then took and edited. So I'll close that, and you can see that's the edited version, that's the original. So you can see the light over on the left hand side, and you can, and then I sort of said about doing the editing for that. So that was quite fun. So this was deliberately designed to be square because at the time we thought it was maybe going to go on the cover of the EP. In the end, they went with a different photo, but this was still used for a lot of promotional work. It was put into local newspapers, being put into posters and stuff for promoting the bands and the EP. So but because there was that first thought of it might go on the EP, we needed to design it square, and it was designed with the idea of there being space left at the top here to put the name of the band in. So it's one of those things that if you always remember, if you're creating a photo for a purpose, you need to understand the end use of the photo, and if the end use is going to be on a CD cover. I mean, another thing about this is normally I would probably have cropped this in a little bit closer. But I've left enough here for, again, when things get printed on something like a CD cover, there's what's known as a bleed. So essentially what happens is you need to leave 3mm around the edge, which can get cut, which can easily end up getting cut off in the printing process. So anything that's going to be printed as a postcard, as a flyer, as a CD cover, if it's going right to the edge, they always want you to leave a 3mm bleed. So you have to leave a little bit more than you would actually need. So that was that photo. We then wanted to have a second photo where you wanted it was this idea of having the close-up, which you saw here, and then this is actually double CD space, just in case they wanted to do a kind of a three-part kind of open fold, which was talked about briefly at one point. And they never did, but it was crossed as an idea. So in which case this would cover, essentially this is twice as long as it is high, so it would allow you to cover two sides of a CD opening. But here we're not worrying too much about the mast in the background. Instead we're getting a close-up of all the guys wearing sunglasses, staring into the camera with absolute attitude. I've stuck the wide angle lens on and I'm really in close, and everything is just kind of pushing out into the front. As well as having the light off to the left hand side like I had before, I also put one behind them, and if you just look at the way the light is coming in off the edge, the edge of his face here, the edge of his face here, and creating a kind of slight halo around the back of his, you can work out that there's a light directly behind his head as well. The original for this one is this photo. Now, what was was interesting about this? So I've been taking several up until this point. Andrew on the right there, holding the can of Tennant's, the idea was he'd just be sort of side on drinking out of it, and I was trying to get the lines. What I wanted was a nice diagonal, but if his arm here came down too diagonal, then it sort of missed, and then if it was up, and whatever shape I did didn't seem to be working. But I was trying a couple of things. I was saying, okay, Andrew, move your elbow up, move it down, and I would click. And then I was counting them in 3, 2, 1, click, 3, 2, 1, click. And then there was a moment where I just went 3, 2, 1, and Andrew shot his hand out and pointed straight at me. I went click, and I was yes. I mean, how brilliant is that? I'd love to say that we all knew it was going to happen at the beginning, but we didn't. That was just purely Andrew improvising in that moment, and it just created it really lifts the photo in a different way. So by the time we get on to editing it, then you can see it's got full attitude, and the editing style deliberately done very kind of high contrast, slightly desaturated, to just give it a kind of attitude, really, which is sort of slightly reflective of the indie style of their music and their performance. So that was that shoot. A lot of fun, great bunch of guys, and huge thanks to Brody as well for helping me put the video together. So yeah, I thought that would be kind of a fun one to sort of introduce tonight's episode with. So Kasama, Kasama, just look them up, or Kasama Band. I think they are on Instagram, at Kasama Band, and it's Kasama UK, Kasama-UK, on Facebook. Right, okay, let's take a quick look back at the comments, see if we have anybody. Oh, Rosie's come in. Hello, Kim. Hi, Rosie. Glad you could make it along. Okay, so we've got 5 different people sent in stuff for tonight. A couple of them sent a couple of different photos and different styles. I don't have time to go through all of them, so I'll just essentially go one from each tonight, I think. So at this point, just quick reminder. Yep, here we are. Facebook, comment, join in. If I say anything which you think is interesting, or you want to challenge, or you want to question a bit more, then drop it in the comments. If you want to support, the buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. And the other thing is, now, for anybody who is the first time here, essentially Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, as you see here, we've also got a Facebook group of the same name. Now, the idea here is that if you would like me to take a little look over your own photos, give you some kind of feedback, or answer some kind of question that you have about photography, post your images in there during the week. Let me know what kind of feedback you're looking for, and then the following podcast, I can take a look at it, and we can sort of see where it goes, see how best I can help you move forward with your photography. The main problem that we all have with our photography is trying to get a bit of honest feedback, because whenever we stick a photo up, friends just click like and tell us how great we are, which is really lovely for the ego, but doesn't actually help us advance very far with our photography. Most people don't want to cause offence, so if they don't like it, or they can see something that's glaringly wrong, they're not likely to tell us. So that's what this corner of the internet is about. It's an opportunity for you to put your images in and get a bit of feedback. But also it's an opportunity for you to see me giving feedback on other people's photos as well. So the whole thing kind of becomes educational, but hopefully in a sort of slightly entertaining way as well. Right. I feel like I've been going quite fast so far. Pause for breath. Okay. So what are we going to look at first tonight? I think what I'm going to look at is let's talk about Becca. Now, Becca said, I will just say briefly with Becca, a couple of weeks ago I did a workshop for Spring Fling, and it was a series of short workshops over 4 consecutive nights. There was a prize to be won for person who put in what I consider the most interesting image or whatever, and Becca won that. And we were, so the prize was essentially a 1-to-1. It's an hour, in fact actually I think it was an hour and a half, wasn't it, Becca? That's basically down to me blethering on. Anyway, so we talked about different aspects of photography, things she was interested in. I mentioned to her more about the notion of shadow play. And I mean, Caravaggio is one of these that I always talk about. If you're going to study, Caravaggio was the master of shadows. It's a Italian artist from a few hundred years ago. Look him up. He knew amazing stuff with shadows, which a lot of people are still trying to get to grips with today. But it's part of a sort of narrative storytelling photography. It's a good one. So starting from that point. Becca was starting to think about the notion of shadows and light and where we go from there. And so she just playing around with the idea. I thought I'd have an attempt at the vivid light and shadow. And she was sort of playing around with a couple of photos of some ponies. But the main thing here is was wondering about the use of black and white as opposed to colour. Does it automatically create intensity? It's quite an interesting idea, that. So where are we? Where's Becca's photo? So we'll go with this one. So she's got a couple of different photos. But this, well, okay, let's just briefly show you. I mean, she took this one where the lights faded, and you're not getting that kind of same dramatic change. This is her raw photo, and then she did another one here and then edited it into black and white. Now there's a difference between colour and black and white, and so I kind of wanted to address that a little bit here. So what I'll do, actually, I'll tell you what, probably for ease, what I'll do is I'll take, excuse me, I'll take this photo first, just because we've got strong sunlight. And what I'll do is I will crop this, but I'll create a kind of rough sort of rule of thirds type crop, so the horse is a third of the way across. Now, what happens if we turn this to black and white? Now, there's a whole number of different ways you can turn it into black and white, but I'm just going to do a quick one here using the gradient map. And there's no doubt it has a different feel when you're in black and white than it does in colour. Just purely... And one of the things that it does is it makes the contrast between the light and the dark areas more noticeable. The thing is when we've got it in colour, what we notice, where the sort of lines of difference are, tend to be colourful. We're noticing the white of the horse and the green of the field and the trees and what have you. So, but when it's in black and white, the greys it's now greys of the field and greys in the horse, and everything's sort of grey, or maybe tiny little patches of white, so small patches of black. Most of it is shades of grey. But you can now really tell the difference between the lighter part and the darker part. And in fact, we can exaggerate that somewhat. If I take the curves here, and if I drag the curves down, make the darks darker, and just bring up the lights lighter. So what I'm doing here is creating more of a contrast. Now, if I take the gradient map off, it's a bit sickly, to be honest. In colour it doesn't work quite so well, but in black and white it kind of does a bit, because it's what the black and white does is because there is no colour, your eye, everything that you're reading is purely based on gradations of tone. This line is different from that line because it's lighter or it's darker, rather than it's greener or it's redder or it's more purple or it's bluer or it's browner or anything like that. The only thing you've got to go on is light and dark, and as such it quite often makes the texture stand out something more as well. So it does change the mood. The fact is, unless you are particular kind of colour blind, pretty much everybody sees the world in colour. So as soon as we go black and white, we are abstracting. We're making a slightly more abstract form of visual. And what that means is that the brain has to start interpreting more in order to make sense of what it is. So the fact that we work harder in a way to make sense of what we're seeing gives more involvement from the viewer. And as such, the feeling of it is slightly different. It's not all presented to us as in a, here you are, you know, horse in a field, white horse in a field. Okay, do we need to say much more than that? But once we go black and white, it's not just horse in a field, it's light hitting the side of the horse. It's horse casting a shadow. It's darker trees in the background, lighter grass in the foreground. So our brain is now sort of starting to interpret a bit more. Whereas without in colour, we just sort of see the horse as generally white. In black and white, the markings on the horse, which show you that it's not completely white, become that little bit more obvious. So I think it is interesting. I think it's very often when you're editing photos, it's always worth a quick flick into black and white just to sort of see what it will look like. Even if you don't turn it to black and white, sometimes having the black and white, just looking at it, helps you to distinguish between certain areas of light and dark, and then can help you decide how you're going to edit it. But sometimes it can have quite a dramatic effect. A photo, I used an example way back around about episode 22, no, sorry, about episode 5 or 6 or 7 or something like that, quite early on. And I'll just show you this one again. Is this one, which was the Undefended Hour. Some of you might remember it. If you're fairly new to this, you probably, most of you won't. This photo was taken for the woman here sticking on the lipstick. She'd written a book of poetry, the themes of which were all around sex, death and humour. And the thing is with this photo is the first thing you see is the woman sticking on lipstick. Then you look over her shoulder and you notice the woman sitting on the bed behind. Then you glance down and you have to notice the knife in the back and the murder scene. Now, I'm not going to go into the full story about this. I went into the full story about this way back in episode whatever, so you can always go and look it up on YouTube. But what I wanted to the reason I brought it in again here is because the particular thing about this photo was it was actually originally designed in colour. And if I show you the colour version, this was where I was going for the original photo. And it was designed for sort of yellowy golds and dark red. So, you know, we've got the candles, we've got soft yellow light. Both women have a sort of yellowish blonde hair. Anne here is sticking on a deep red lipstick, is wearing a deep red dress, and of course it's all reflecting in the blood at the back here, in the back here. We've even sort of allowed some of the lipstick to, you know, sort of be placed onto cigarette ends. So the whole thing was designed around this sort of black, yellowy gold, red and yellowy gold kind of theme. And when I was editing, I was quite happy with it. But then I flipped it into black and white, and suddenly it became kind of film noir, femme fatale. It was I was so much more aware of the shadow play with this. In this, yes, there are shadows when you look for them, but you're getting caught up mostly with the colour. As soon as you go here and you remove the colour, you become aware of the light and the dark and the different dramatic places, the way the shadow and light is playing. So it is worth playing around with the notion of black and white and seeing what you can do with it. Again, I've got other tutorials in the past where I talk about several different ways of converting to black and white, and some of them will crop up again, but that's not the plan for this evening's talk, because just taking the saturation bar and sliding it down and desaturating doesn't always give you the best level of depth of shadows, so you sometimes need to play with things a bit more. But anyway, so yeah, so to come back to that then, Becca, basically what I would say is yes, black and white can be more interesting, and primarily it's because of the fact that it shows you that contrast between dark and light. and so is always worth kind of taking a look at. So I hope that helps a bit and gives you a little bit of insight there. So let's close that, minimize that. And what shall we do next? Right, now, it doesn't look like I have any more. Oh, wait, no, I do have. Stacey says, I saw something about blending modes. Blending modes. Yeah. That's a really big topic. I'm going to touch a little bit on blending modes slightly with Mandy's picture a bit later. But I'm not going to go into big detail on that just now, Stacey, because it is a kind of huge topic in its own right, and we will be here to midnight if I make a start on that, and I'm sure some of you have other things you want to do this evening. Okay. Oh, and Becca's coming in. Great insight. Thanks. Well, I'm glad that was useful, Becca. Thank you. Okay, so next up then, I want to talk, what are we doing? We've got Becca and Maya. Okay, so, right. So Maya has sent in, oh, where have we gone? This photo. And she says, right now, Maya had already started a conversation with me in the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group about the notion of still life. She wanted some hints and ideas about still life. Now, still life is a massive subject, even more than blending layers. It's a bit like saying landscape photography or portraiture. You know, it's an entire genre on its own. And as such, it's, I started saying, well, okay, can you break it down a bit? Ask me a little bit more. Better still, send me an example of a kind of photo, a particular area that you're after. There is a little bit of a problem sometimes with photography. People are putting photos in and then just saying, what do you think, or answer. But in a way, the answer's too broad. I need, if you want help with something specific, the more specific you can be with me, with the information, the easier it is for me to help you with that particular difficulty. So this one, but essentially, she said, here's a good example. I submitted the attached photo to a photograph competition, Round Foods, and it finished something like about 150th. I was expecting a better result. It looks like people didn't pay attention to the photo. What do you think is the problem here? Any critique will be welcome. Now, from the way Maya has written this, what's clear is it's a problem that plagues all of us. Anybody who ever picked up a camera or a photographic device, took some photos that they liked, and then put out there and didn't get the response that they wanted. And it's happened to all of us. And it happens to all of us very regularly. And we can't understand why. And that's partly, of course, what this whole critique section is about. So when we look at this photo, excuse me. So the competition she put it in was called Round Foods. And so what she's got is she's got these little meringues which have been made, which are clearly round. And she's put it in. And so what works, what's nice about this photo is you've got its softness, really. You've got the soft pastel colours, you've got the beautifully soft shadows, and it's in a soft piece of kind of netting material. So at first glance, there's beautifully soft, creamy light with these sort of soft little meringues, which you just know would sort of crunch and then get kind of all gooey in the middle, sort of stick your teeth together. So the question is why didn't it get the response that she wanted? Now, first of all, it has to be said that there could be any number of reasons. A lot depends on what you're up against in the competition, and who is looking at it. I don't know who won the competition. Maybe it was somebody eating a raw steak or something, and it happened to be that the vegetarians were all off that day. So, you can never be sure about that. But having said that, I think really here the problem isn't the lighting or the colouring. The problem here, Maya, is the composition, and it's how it's laid out. Because essentially what happens is you've got the nice meringues sort of sitting, and it looks like you've made a nest out of that sort of soft netting material. And so they're all sort of sitting in like a kind of little kind of made basket nest area with a couple of pieces sitting around the outside scattered about. But the problem is that the angle you've got, or the way that you've done the netting, means that we've got the side wall of it obscuring part of the things, and essentially it's creating a dramatic. I'll tell you what I'll do. I will open this in Photoshop because I want to just sort of draw over the top of it for a moment. That in essence, if I go to pencil tool here, we've got this here and we've got this here, right? And this whole area in between is dominant. It's dominant white. It's the dominant part. You can see, if because I've scribbled it in black, that's very dominant. But if I remove that now, what you can see is that this whole area is taking up a large chunk of that picture. But the thing is that your photo, the story of the photo, if you like, the bit you're trying to convey, is about the meringues. It's not about the netting. The netting is a background texture to enhance the mood, feel, taste of the meringues. It shouldn't be that dominant. But because half the meringues or a couple of the meringues are obscured by this great strong line swooping across the middle of it, it throws the whole composition out. It makes the netting a bigger part of the story than it should be. It's only supposed to be a supporting actor, not a kind of the main role. And in essence, I think that's kind of where your problem lies. You can then, there are other things now, unfortunately, I can't really cut them out and replace them without it looking a bit ridiculous, but there are other ways that you can sort of lay things out so that you can create moving lines that move from one meringue to another and create curves or even a basket of itself. And it's really, they feel a little bit random here. You've placed them, you've got some around the edge here, but I think it's sort of the bits are dotted around, and I really feel that some more thought to, like I say, remove the netting or lower the netting. Don't have the basket, just allow the netting to be sort of underneath, and then place them around and move them around and create curves and soft curves and shapes and diagonal movements and waves through it. And I think then you're much more likely to get something interesting, because the markings on the meringues are curves. These kind of clamshell curves or these swirls. It's all about curves and movement. But the strongest curve you have is this bit running through the middle of it, and so that's really where the problem lies, I think, Maya. I hope that makes sense. I hope that gives you a little bit more insight. Okay, so thanks for sending that in. So just close that one. What have we got here? Rosie's talking body pony. Mayor's come in with hello. VG says, hello Mayor. VG says, love the photo of the pony. Becca looks peaceful. And Stacey, love horses and photographs of them. Okay, cool. Well, so I hope you're watching that, Mayor, and you didn't come in just as I finished talking about it. If you did, you can always watch it back on the YouTube bit. Right. Okay. So, what I want to talk about now, let's see, we've had Becca, Mayor. Let's go VG. Okay, VG. So, Now, a couple of different things. VG sent me some portraits. She also sent me a picture of a flower. I'm afraid I don't have time to sort of go through everything tonight. So what I'm going to do is talk about the flower this evening, if you wish. So find. So VG sent in this image, and she said, "Photos for critique. Try some portraits and a bokeh shot of flower. Let me know how you feel about the photographs and how they could be improved, and any thoughts about editing." So what I wanted to talk about with this one, VG, is I think there's a couple of things, really. One is composition, the other is light. The first thing actually I will say is in terms of, first I should say it's a beautiful flower, and it's beautiful, beautiful colours, beautiful lines. I like the lines, I like the shapes that you've got within it. And then the bokeh, the fact that it sort of gets more out of focus as it goes into the background, helps to sort of make the flower stand out a little bit. However, it is quite dark, and I think if you'd managed to somehow find another way of lighting this, I think you could have really lifted it. I don't know, now, are you looking straight down on it? Are you looking side onto it? I don't really have a point of reference for this. I'm imagining that you're possibly looking down on it, but I'm not sure what you had in the background. Now, the other thing is with this is the sharpest bit you've got is on the edge of the petals here, and the actual main part here, which is the bit that you get drawn to, isn't quite in focus. It looks like you've got it on a very shallow depth of field, and the focal point is just sort of missed it. So it's sort of sharper on just in front of it and just slightly out of focus there. It's a little bit of a shame, but that kind of thing happens quite easily. However, I think it would be noticeable if you're blowing it up to, sort of poster size image. But if it's going to be used as a web image, I think we could get away with that by just sharpening and adding a bit more texture to it. But I think the lighting is fairly it's a kind of fairly dull lighting. I think something a little bit more reflective with the shadows. If you'd got I don't know where the main light source was, but I think even if you've got a reflector just off to one side, slightly out of the photo, but bouncing some light back in, I think you would have got a little bit more depth to it, which could really kind of lift it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open, you sent me the original, so I will open that one in Photoshop. So we can see that, you have already, it's, sort of, you've enriched it a little bit. Or maybe Photoshop is just making it slightly more dull as well. So there's a whole bunch to the left that you've removed. So really with the light, if I'll just crop that in a bit so that we're not too distracted by all that lot, just for the moment. Actually, what I do want to talk, which do I talk about first? Okay, no, I will. Let's go back here for the moment because I will talk a little bit about if we just repeat that layer, take it into camera raw where I can sort of play a little bit more with it. I think first of all, if we just hit the auto button, lightens it up a bit, immediately makes it sort of brighter and a bit more vibrant. And you've got this amazing colour here, and I think you sort of want to kind of make the most of that. We can, so you've got something like that. You can see it immediately becomes brighter. Now, what I was talking about earlier with actually black and white, there's another interesting way, which if you've got Photoshop, I don't know whether other editing programs do the same, there's this notion of channels, where you get the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. And this is another way of converting to black and white. But if you look at the red channel, what it does is it makes all the reds much lighter, and the opposite darker. If you go to the green channel, you can see that the greens are lighter, but the reds and the magentas are now very dark. And if you go to the blue channel, it's different again. And what I like particularly about the blue channel is the blue channel has given us a more, and if I just copy that and then come back and paste it on top here, a bit like the kind of, we can see that there's much more texture. You know, this lighter bit is lighter, this darker bit is darker. And I think there's sort of, you can see more, to go back to Becker's, the point we were talking about with Becker, that the black and white sometimes gives you a sense of where the light and the dark is, where without the, when it's in colour, we're just sort of looking at colour difference. We're very struck by the difference in colour between the sort of purpley magenta of the flower and the green of the leaves behind. Whereas in black and white, we can't tell a difference in colour, so we become very aware of the difference in tone. And there, I think it gives you a much stronger sense of the depth of it to play around with. So I think if there'd been a stronger light with this, it would have become more obvious. And I think you could have played with that depth a little bit more. So again, if I just go back into Camera Raw filter, and what I'll do is I'll grab the clarity, which will make more contrast out of a little bit more texture, something like that, and then a little bit more vibrant because it saps some of the colour out of it. Now that's maybe too much overall, so what I will do is I will mask that and then just paint it in, leave the background as it was, but just paint it in over the leaves or something like that. So now you can see, let's zoom in a little bit more just for those on a smaller screen. You get a bit more texture, and it also accentuates a little bit more the contrast between the light and the dark, which is where I think you know, if you'd actually got a slightly stronger light on it, or reflected light playing on it, you would have got more out of. So that's one thing you can do, but there's another thing that I wanted to talk about here, which is in terms of the angle of the flower. Now what you've got here, what I realise you've done is you've turned it to a diagonal, and it runs up sort of to a kind of diagonal corner. Now, I'll tell you what, let's just paste that there, because what I want to show you is a couple of other things here. I'll do content aware fill, just to give a slight idea of. So if we can, on one way you can do it is you can make it even more diagonal and have this bottom leaf pointing down to the far corner. So if I just do that, the content aware fill on Photoshop will just make up a background where the white was by judging bits from elsewhere. And so now you can see with the shape of that it's now we've taken more of that diagonal, made it much stronger, which kind of creates an interesting shape in its own right. So just to flip back, if we go from there to there, becomes kind of interesting in the way that it changes the feel of it. But actually there's a different way that I want to go with this, which is to, whilst I normally talk a lot about diagonals, what I was playing around with this earlier, and what I love with this is if we make it vertical. And the thing is oh, I've done this on the wrong, let's go back, select all, copy, paste, and just try that again. Yeah, so now normally I'm always talking about the diagonals and not having necessarily a dominant vertical, but in this case I think we can get away with the dominant vertical because the leaves are all diagonal. And what I love about this what I suppose I was really drawn to with this is it feels to me almost like a dancer. You know, there's a beautiful kind of, you can imagine somebody dancing beautifully with the robes and the material flowing around them as they go. And at that point, the curves of the leaves become swirly and full of movement. And I think that kind of, you know, and pretty much it's, you know, very loosely, you've got the head here and this wonderful sort of set of material flying out in all directions as the dancer swirls around. I think there's something very powerful about that. So although it is dominant vertical, it's offset by all these diagonals, even the sort of slight diagonals of the leaves behind. And then from that, I think, if we went to our camera raw, we could brighten it up a bit, maybe put a little vignette in, play around again a bit more with the clarity or the texture. Not sure whether that's oversaturated now, but something like that. And there's something I think so I think it's particularly beautiful like that. Now, obviously, everybody's going to have a different. Some people prefer that sort of corner to corner diagonal, but for my money, this I really quite like it like this. So I hope that helps, Fiji. So the two main things here. One is the light. And I've played in Photoshop here to create more of a contrast between the highlights and the shadows. But I think if you could get a bit more of that naturally, which would happen with a reflector, maybe bouncing a bit more light onto it, so that the tips get caught in the light and the shadows have a little bit more depth, I think that would be fun. And the other thing is the composition. Always worth playing around with, stick it in, tilt it diagonally, put it straight, play around until sooner or later when you're doing something, you'll hit a sweet spot. Or you won't. Sometimes I do all this and then just abandon the photo because I realise I can't seem to do anything with it. But every now and again you turn something. That's what happened with this. I started off moving it into the diagonal this afternoon while I was playing around with this image a little bit, and then I sort of put it upright and it just went zing. And I thought, and it reminded me of this notion of a dancer with the robes swirling. So yeah, anyway, I hope that helps, VG. Something to play with. So all right, yeah, VG says, yes, I felt like the flower all dressed up in a huge fluffy gown. Yes. And Stacey says, good way to change direction, and it's a wonderful angle, pretty flower. Excellent. Okay. Cool. Okay, and VG says, got it, great inputs, thank you. I'm glad, VG, thank you. Okay, so where are we now? Let me, what am I going to talk about now? I think, Stacey. Okay, Stacey, you've been here patiently chatting away from the beginning. I want to talk now a little bit about your selfie. So, where has it gone? Right, here we go. So, Stacey says, so I managed to do a selfie. The problem I have is this is one of my areas in this rancher that has a direct light source. Okay, one of the only areas in the rancher that has a direct light source. My French door to the backyard. Behind me is plants, which I tried to crop out. I took about 15 shots because mentally I'm not a selfie individual. And that's fair enough. And a lot of this comes out of, again, Stacey took part in the, watch the, so I having a kind of energy slump for a moment, and the brain suddenly lost what I was doing. Yes, the Spring Fling workshop, where I talked quite extensively about the notion of self-portraits and selfies. And Stacey's had a go here. She's created a selfie, and so this is the one she's created. And I like the diagonals. I like the way the shoulders come out, and then you've got this triangle coming in. You've got the arm coming up. So it's quite a nice shape to that. It does feel like it's sort of tilting slightly over to one side a little bit, but as a kind of shape, it's quite fun. And to address the other thing, which is you're not a selfie kind of person, that's fair enough. Most people aren't. Even the people who take loads of selfies. The reason they take loads of selfies is because they can never get a photo that they like, and they take hundreds of them because every now and again they just get one which they think that'll do. feels a bit more in control if you're the one taking the photo of yourself rather than somebody else is photographing you. Because whenever somebody else photographs you, we kind of feel a bit victimized by it. It's something that's done to us, whether we wanted it or not. We have a little bit more control if we're doing self-portraits. But what you're talking about here is the fact that what you've got is you've got one place where you've got a nice large window, the French doors, and that's the only place you could do. You've got some plants in the background that were getting in the way. But I think the biggest problem that you've got here, in essence, is most of your face is lost in shadow. Okay? Now, you probably like that because you're trying to hide your face. And this is back to that problem, you know. Most people don't like photos of themselves. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, some of which I've talked about before. But in essence, I see this happen a lot. People do self-portraits reluctantly, and then they do their best to hide themselves in their self. So it's not really a self-portrait, it's a self-silhouette, a self-shadow, a self-hidden bit. There's not enough light to really let us... So you've got to remember, a portrait selfie is there so people can see you, so people can recognise you, so people can capture or get a mood of how you're feeling. You know, you don't necessarily have to smile for the camera. You can be melancholic, you can be dramatic, you can be fun, you can be serious, you can be thoughtful, you can be wistful. You know, there's 1,000 different ways that you can be. And I think there's a huge amount of fun to be had in self-portraits, where you get to be an actor. You play a part. Okay, you play a part, a role. You're dressing up. Even if you're not dressing up physically, putting different clothes on, you dress up with your face. You can experiment a lot more. Now, what I wanted to talk about particularly with this though it's around the whole light thing. The fact is, the light, we can barely see your face here. There's a bit of light catching the edge of your face here, and a bit catching the tip of your nose, and then a bit catching the inside of your arm, and a bit catching the outside of your arm. And basically, because most of the light is behind you, you're turned away from the window. And so I thought the best thing I could do here, just literally 2 hours ago, not 3 hours ago, I just grabbed my camera and I went and stood by the window and I took a series of photos, which I want to show you now. Because I want to show you what happens in relation to the window. So here I am, here's my selfie with the window behind me. And what's happened is the camera has auto-adjusted for the idea that there's a lot of light in the photo, because outside it is much, much brighter than it is inside. So the settings have adjusted such that outside, out my window, is reasonably well exposed. The problem with that is because I'm standing with my back to it, I've essentially become silhouette. You can't really make out much of my expression here. So what I then did is, from going with the window behind me, I then turned. I went about 45 degrees. And now you can see I've got partial light on me. Half my face, well, about a third of my face, a quarter to a third of my face is lit. The other half is, half of it's very much lost in shadow. My eyes are still lost in shadow. You're getting a better sense of who I am. I'm not quite as far lost in shadow as you were, Stacey, because there's more of my nose is being lit up. You're sort of like a slightly less than that, so that only the tip was catching the light. If I turn again another kind of 45 degrees, we then end up with me literally half onto the window. And now I think that creates a kind of really interesting light. Let's go back. We've gone from silhouette to starting to get the light to now we've got light falling on more than half my face. And partly because I'm also back against the edge of the window, it's not just literally coming from the side, it's coming from the side and some of it's falling from the front as well. So that means it's hooking over my nose, and there's a little bit of light appearing on my cheek on this side as well. If I turn another 45 degrees, Now quite a lot of my face is being lit up. But you can still see I'm lighter on the right than I am on the left. Then if I turn another photo, now I'm sort of, you know, kind of 90 degrees-ish. Or maybe I've gone just a little bit over. But now what's happened is that same window is behind the camera. So it's completely 180 degrees round from that. And then I go again, and now we can start to see my face moving back into shadow again. Turn again, halfway in, only this time there's less light. 3/4 of the way round, and then back again. Okay, so my face almost becomes like the phases of the moon. Waxing and waning, which is pretty much exactly is what's happening with the phases of the moon. You know, the sun is shining on it as it goes round and moves. The light then is hitting half, you know, so we get a new moon, a half moon, full moon, and then waxing moon, you know, back to an old moon and what have you. So that, I think that demonstrates, I mean, none of these are edited, these were just very quickly taken, but I think it helps to illustrate, you know, the expression is pretty much the same. I'm not changing my expression. All that's changing here is the light in the background. I've just literally turned, going around like that with the camera. And I think it's worth, you know, it's a fun little exercise to do. You know, I've done it here, you do it, you know. You take that same idea, Stacey, sort of just photograph yourself at different angles to the window and see what happens, see how the light changes. Then, you know, one of the things I'm often talking to people about is, especially, you know, if you're starting out in photography, you know, what's the biggest way to leap your photography forward? And one of the biggest ways is to understand light and shadow. And one of the easiest ways to learn to understand light and shadow is to literally do what I've just done there, which is move in a circle around the light source. And you can see just how it changes. You know, that mood is quite different from that mood. And then that's different again, that's different again, that's different again. So I hope you find that useful, Stacey, and I hope the rest of you find that useful too. I think it really does illustrate quite well that whole thing about light. Okay, let's close those. And yep, Stacey says very useful. I'm glad. And oh, my wife says great little demonstration. Thank you, Maggie. Appreciate that. Right. Okay. So where have we got to? So we've done Stacey, we've done Mayo, we've done Becca, done VG. Okay, Mandy. Right. Okay. So this was a this one for Mandy now. What's interesting with this is that basically Mandy was very happy with the photo, and kind of quite rightly. It's a beautiful photo. But what we're looking at is the idea of just one or two slightly different ways of editing it, which can kind of change the mood a bit. Now, you know, it might be enhancing it or it might be detracting from it, depending on the story you want to tell. But I just wanted to show a couple of little quick editing techniques which can make a difference. So where are we? Mandy's photo Mandy sent was this one. So she was down in Cumbria. I say down because I'm in Scotland, which is above Cumbria, but to everybody in England it's up to Cumbria. One of the northernmost counties other than Northumberland before you hit Scotland. And she says this was her favourite from a trip to the Lake District, literally in the stream up to my ankles. Glad I had waterproof boots on. Got pretty damp though, but it was worth it. And it's a beautiful shot. I mean, a beautiful old stone, moss on the rocks, light glinting through the trees, the stonework, the water wheel. Yeah, I mean, I think if I'd sort of found that spot, I could have sort of stood there taking photos all day. There's no doubt about it. So what Mandy did though was she sent me this is her edited version. And whilst I think it's, it is a beautiful photo, for my taste, I felt the shadows were just a bit too dark. I felt that there was detail being lost down in the rocks. And so I was, sorry, lost that one. There we go. No, start, yeah, back again. Yep. So I kind of felt that there was maybe other ways of looking at it. So Mandy sent me her raw file, and I'll just open that here. Let's go take that off auto, and as shot. Yep. So it's not quite as rich in colour, which is fine, because this is the raw file. You wouldn't expect it to be. This is pre-editing. So if I just open that as that, and if we, okay, let's just close that one, and let's open this with Photoshop as well, so we can literally compare side by side. So she hasn't cropped it at all. It's just, that's her edit. That's the unedited version. Now, I think what I might do as a starting point is maybe just try and make sure that I've not lost quite as much in the shadow. So if this is going to be very quick because, yeah, I wouldn't, obviously with a picture like that, you really want to take your time over the editing, which you have. And I don't really have time to do all that this evening. However, if I click the auto settings, we then end up with more richer colours coming out, but we haven't necessarily lost as much in the shadow. Now, I might, just add a little bit of vignetting, might even add a little bit of clarity, just to sort of see, that's too far, that's not enough, but just a little bit more, just to sort of bring out some of that texture. And immediately we've got something that's sort of starting to approach an edited photo. It's not quite as far as that, but it's still, we're still moving into something. Now, there's essentially two different techniques that I wanted to talk to you, Mandy, about that for playing with, because one of the things about this photo is it's got very much a kind of sort of fantasy element to it, really. You can almost imagine the gnomes or the elves or the dryads sort of sitting in there. And the one thing that struck me was the notion of the colour scheme. Now, there's not a lot of colour in the water. Even with yours, I think what's happened is, because you've gone for a sort of slightly stronger contrast, there's hints of blue in the water. The greens are very strong. But what I get tempted by here is, and this is something I've used before, so I will talk about it again. There's it's a shortcut trick with the channel mixer. So you go to the channel mixer, and on the red channel, you take the green up to 100, and you take the blue down to minus 100, thereabouts. Now, that in itself is way too overcooked. But what you do is, if you bring it back again and then just sort of start nudging it in, you find that what it does is it makes the water, well, if I take it back up to here, it makes the water bluer and it makes the greens yellower. But if you sort of take it up, well, what you could do is, if you wanted that water blue, you could take it up to there, mask it, and then what I'll just do is, it's not quite what I meant to do. Paint that back out, but I'm just going to leave the blue of the water there for the moment, and also that little bit of orange in the water. So you've got this kind of, the orange and the blues have become much stronger, which sort of creates that up with the water. So I think the water becomes more vivid. You can see that. I'll just zoom in there. And that orangey yellow kind of makes it feel a bit warmer. But what you could do, and if I take this down to just a sort of 30%, 33% capacity. You could maybe just sort of take some of where the light is on the moss or on the edge of the water wheel. So it's not as strong as it was before, but it makes the sun, that sort of sense of the dappled sunlight, come out a little bit stronger, I think. It also does make the leaves look much more autumnal, which I think also that there's a notion of on the cusp always feels slightly more magical. The magic isn't in high summer, the magic is in spring, and the magic is in autumn. It's in the places of transition. Always with your magic, your old folk tales and everything, things always happen in places of transition. At dusk and at dawn, the transition between night and day, when it's not quite night, it's not quite day, that's the magic, that's the portal to the magic. The water's edge, it's not quite water, it's not quite land, that's a transitional place. And seasonally, autumn and spring, it's not quite summer, it's not quite winter. So sometimes by sort of making it slightly more autumnal, that sort of takes it into that place as well. So basically just that kind of thought, that if I just group those together, so we've gone from that to that, or from your version from that to that. Now it's not the same, you may well still prefer the original, and that's absolutely fine. All I'm trying to do here is show you other ways of playing with the editing. Now there is another way that I wanted to play with the editing to show you, which was a few weeks ago. Somebody, suddenly can't remember whether it was Eamon or it was Gary, asked about the Orton effect. Now it's something which does tend to get a bit overused, and I'm going to overuse it tonight just to sort of show you how it works. But I think sometimes subtleness of it can be quite useful. Now the idea with the Orton effect is that what you do is you create almost a sort of glow to it. So what I'm going to do here, and let's just sort of, I'll just take it from this picture. Let's just drag that up there so I can duplicate it. So what you do with that is you filter and you blur the image, and you can, to varying degrees, but I'm going to sort of give a fair amount of blur to it just so you can kind of see what's going on here. And then what you do, and this goes back to blending modes that Stacey asked about earlier. On Photoshop, you've got a whole number of different ways you can, that does darken, multiply, color burn, linear burn. The blending modes are all to do with how one layer interacts with another. Lighten, screen, color dodge. There's a whole bunch of them, some of which do some really strange things to the image. But the one that I'm interested in particularly is essentially overlay. Now this has become too strong, but also what's happened is it's darkened the darks and lightened the lights a bit too much. So what I'm going to do is in between the layers, I'm going to just take a levels thing here and pull that up a little bit. So now what you can see is it's kind of glowing. Take that out, drag it to the right, and it creates this sort of warm fuzzy glow around the edges, especially around the highlights. Now, as I say, this is definitely kind of overkill at this point. I wouldn't want, but in terms of, well, actually, because those, well, I'll just group the levels and the blur together so that I can actually take them both down together. You just take it up a little bit, and it sort of just adds that sort of touch of glowing edge to it. So in terms of a kind of, if you're going for that kind of mystical, magical, other realm kind of feel, which something like this does, then that becomes another way of playing with it. If we go back to your picture, and that's, I'm not saying what you've done is wrong. All I'm doing is showing you other ways of doing it, it's an important part of photography, is that your photo whatever, all the stuff that's taking you up to taking that photo is still the raw material for then how you edit it. And how you decide to edit it, just like how you decided to take it, is very much down to your taste and your style and your voice. And being authentic to your voice. You develop your voice in photography by doing. And everybody's got a slightly different way of doing it. And that's good. I like that, rather than everybody having to sort of churn out exactly. You wouldn't want to have 4 people stand in the same place and take exactly the same photograph and edit it in exactly the same way. Really, 4 people could be standing there and they would each take a slightly different photograph and edit it in a different way and come out with something different. But it's always good to sort of play around to see what other options there are. So that was all, Mandy. I just thought maybe we could play with that, and it's just showing you another way of doing it. So that's it on that. So let's flip back here and close those and come back here. So a couple more comments here. So Becca says, lovely shot, Mandy. And Mandy's come in. Thanks, Becca. And VG, love the sun shining through. Gorgeous shot. This is brilliant. Adding blue to the water is a great idea. I feel like I stepped into the Hobbit's land. Yes, agrees. Looks a bit like a long exposure. And yeah, okay, so that's great. So yeah, chat going on between you. I'm left out of this one. That's okay. Oh no, Mandy is talking to me. Thanks, Kim. Certainly going to play with the slider. Okay, well, I'm glad with that. Okay, so yeah, it's a you know, whether it's the that autumn effect of the blur, or whether it's playing around with that color shift and sort of creating those slightly more autumnal or enriching the blues. There's lots of ways to play around with it, but it's a fabulous photo. I really love that, and yeah, it's certainly a bit of envy from me there. At some point I would love to find that spot and go and take a photo, because it is, but I know I would turn up there and the weather would be different as well. You know, the fact that you've got the sun glinting through those trees with the leaves like that was rather wonderful. Right, so that's pretty much it for the critique section. If you found this interesting and you would like to contribute towards these sessions, don't forget buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Not compulsory, but always appreciated. Next week, I'm going to be just ahead of Fitcher McAndrew. Potters, they have got, they're doing a kind of online exhibition sale thing going on. So I thought that's probably a good time to tie in with the fact that the photo shoot I did with them. Periodically over the last 6 months, I've taken 1 or 2 photos that I've shot of them to use as examples when I've been trying to get a particular point across. But what I'll do is I'll show you a few more of the photos and talk you through some of the decisions that were made, why they were made, editing decisions and things like that, to give you a sense of what the shoot was really about, and also some shots I did with a bit of doorstep photography with them too. So that's Fitcher McAndrew next week. I hope you found this interesting, and thank you very much for sticking around. Get your photos in for next week. You know, earlier the better. The sooner you put in the photos, the more time I have to sort of play around with them and come up with some kind of useful advice for you. If everything's left to the last minute on a Tuesday afternoon, I don't tend to have as much time to do it. So stick your photos in to the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres group as soon as you can, and let me know what bit of advice or help you would like with your photo. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.